everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to talk about anger. Why? Well, it's because I've been really angry lately. Probably for like the last month or two. In fact, it seems like ever since General Conference, things haven't been too good for me in many different ways. And it's just been like a whole number of things. And lately, Jenica and I have been just like arguing in ways that we haven't really argued that much before, which is odd for us. And so I was just like trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Why am I so irritable, so angry? What's going on? And so I've been doing a lot of like soul searching and trying to figure this out and trying to correct things. One thing that I realized is that I've changed medications recently, like some of you know, because I mentioned how I went from escitalopram to bupropion, which is the generic name for Wellbutrin. And I was advised to taper off the escitalopram to avoid withdrawals, right? And I did. And I can't know for sure if I have experienced withdrawals, but a lot of like this like uptick in just frustration and anger has come around this time frame of this transition. So I feel like that could be part of it. But there's also been all these different things going on in my life, just like all these things like literally breaking down. For example, we had our van, the air conditioning went out. We have this white picket fence. Like we have our pasture area, and the fence is sturdy except for this one part, which is a white picket fence. And the guy before, he had like electric fencing set up on the inside of the white picket fence, and that's like what kept the cows from, pushing through, because the pickets are held on by glue. That's it. They're not screwed in or attached in any other way. It's just glue. It's like a plastic fence. And one day, one of our cows, steers, he pushed his head through one of them because he was trying to get to like the longer grass, which I myself had not mowed, which if I had, it wouldn't be poking through the fence and he wouldn't want it. But he did that. And I was like, okay, I'll take care of it the next morning. I'll mow the grass and whatever. But by that point, it was too late, and there were a bunch of other pickets that were just lying on the ground. I did a YouTube short about it. If you go to my shorts, you can see what happened, and it made me pretty upset. We had the fridge break down. There's just been like all these like different financial things that have gone wrong, as well as just like many other things. I'm not going to list them all out, but it seems like I've like really been tested lately with just a long string of negative things, almost like someone's playing a joke on me. And to be fair, at one point I did pray to Heavenly Father to like help me overcome anger. I wanted to like be able to, master this, like master anger and not be angry. And I think at that point, that's when things got even worse. And I think that the reason why is because he's given me the opportunity to get better. It made me think about in the Army, if you wanted to get better at shooting, you had to go to the range. You had to go to a place where you could practice shooting. And unfortunately, with your weapon that you're assigned, the only chance that you ever get to do that is when your unit goes to the range, which isn't very often. On these military posts and installations and bases, well, at least in the Army, they allow you to go to the range off duty, but you can't just like go pick up your weapon from the arms room. It stays in the arms room. It's for official use only. So you can go to the range, but you have to bring your own weapon, which doesn't do you very good if you're like wanting to get really good on your specific weapon that you've been assigned. But essentially, to get better, you have to be in a situation where you can practice. And I think that's essentially what's happened to me is I prayed for it, and Heavenly Father opened up the range for me to go ahead and shoot as much as I want. Which has been a good thing. So identified potentially withdrawals from the other medication as one factor, but I don't think that's the only thing. And I came across some pretty important realizations that you've probably already made in your life, but I just wanted to share some of the insights. First, I want to share. I decided to like look this up, look on the internet about anger. Came across this article, Control Anger Before It Controls You. This is from the American Psychological Association. There's a few takeaways from this. Okay, it says expressing anger. The instinctive, natural way to express anger is to respond aggressively. Anger is a natural, adaptive response to threats. Now, I have a little bit of issue with this. I think that's true, but I think there's maybe a little bit more to it than how it's expressed here. But anyway, continuing. It inspires powerful, often aggressive feelings and behaviors which allow us to fight and to defend ourselves when we are attacked. A certain amount of anger, therefore, is necessary for our survival. On the other hand, we can't physically lash out at every person or object that irritates or annoys us. Laws, social norms, and common sense place limits on how far our anger can take us. People use a variety of both conscious and unconscious processes to deal with their angry feelings. Okay, now look at this. The three main approaches are expressing, suppressing, and calming. So number one, expressing your angry feelings in an assertive, not aggressive manner is the healthiest way to express anger, according to the APA. To do this, you have to learn how to make clear what your needs are and how to get them met without hurting others. Now, that's interesting because, in the gospel, that's pretty much a lot of what the gospel has to do with is how we treat others, right? It's all about loving God first, the first great commandment, and loving others, and how we treat them. So, everything that we do, in this life, everything, we have to be mindful of the needs of others. We do have to, think about ourselves, but the two great commandments is love God and love your neighbor, right? And then at the same time, taking care of yourself. But there's kind of a lesson there in just the two great commandments. I'm going to go over more of that in just a minute. Let's continue. Okay, so being assertive doesn't mean being pushy or demanding. It means being respectful of yourself and others. Anger can be suppressed. Okay, this is number two. Anger can be suppressed and then converted or redirected. This happens when you hold in your anger, stop thinking about it, and focus on something positive. The aim is to inhibit or suppress your anger and convert it into more constructive behavior. The danger in this type of response is that if it isn't allowed outward expression, your anger can turn inward toward yourself. Anger turned inward may cause hypertension, high blood pressure, or depression. So, that's another way that you can do it, and that's kind of like what I first started doing when I started taking this like really seriously. Is I was like, you know what, I can take this anger that I'm feeling, and a different path that I can take is I can convert it into sadness. Because anger tends to lead you to hurt others, to try and get your way, but if you turn it into sadness, that's more of like that's more of a kind of a giving up or letting it go, where it's like, sorry, I had to restart the video. So being sad instead of mad kind of takes away that desire to get what you want. It's more of like a resignation. There's something that has upset you, but instead of like doing things to rectify the situation, you essentially accept it and allow yourself just to feel sad, to feel defeat. But don't worry, I have more to say about that. That's just like an example of one thing that I initially did. Which that's not the point of this video. I've come to like a much deeper realization of something. But let me just finish this off. Okay, third, this is the third thing. Finally, you can calm down inside. This means not just controlling your outward behavior, but also controlling your internal responses, taking steps to lower your heart rate, calm yourself down, and let the feelings subside. As Dr. Spielberger notes, quote, when none of these three techniques work, that's when someone or something is going to get hurt. Okay. So I must say that converting anger into sadness, it works pretty well. But like the article said, you have to be careful that you don't let it get to a point where you start getting really down on yourself. Otherwise, you're essentially going to be attacking yourself. You know, why am I so this? Why am I so that? Why can't I do this? And, you know, leading probably to an irrational stream of thoughts directed at yourself. So I was thinking about this, and as you know, I've you know, really taken the time to learn as much as I can about narcissism, toxic personalities, you know, which are essentially in psychology, you have these personality disorders. And the way that I've heard it described by Dr. Ramani is that, you know, we all have the tendency to do things that are not good, or essentially have these different types of personalities. And there's a spectrum, but someone that in psychology is officially diagnosed with a personality disorder is someone that has taken a personality but gone to like the far, far, far extreme, to the point where it like is a psychological issue. Again, not a mental disorder. There's like nothing wrong necessarily with like the brain, chemistry or anything like that. It's just essentially someone has developed a very rigid way of living, and taking it to the extreme. So what I realized is after I converted my anger to sadness and just like allowed myself to go that route instead, which was very helpful, by the way, I realized that, you know, what was it that was making me so upset about these things? The article said that it's like when you're like defending yourself. But I thought about, well, that can't like always be true. Cause like, you say that in your neighborhood, you have a neighbor a few doors down that decides to start painting their house in like hot pink, hot green, colors, you know, colors from the 90s, neon green, and just like something just completely ridiculous. Well, that's not a threat to me, you know, but I would probably get upset about it. So why would that be if it's not a threat to me? And I realized that it's because everyone kind of has like this expectation about how things are supposed to go. Or in other words, everyone kind of has like an idealized plan for their life and for their surroundings, you know, for the future, for the current surroundings, not just within your immediate sphere, but extending out into the world, encompassing the entire world, a way that you would prefer that things go. And so when something goes against your idealization or your plan, you experience a frustration. You know, your plan gets frustrated, and so you get angry. So this neighbor down the street that paints their house like a psycho, it interrupts your plan because you don't want to be associated with that. You don't want people to come to your neighborhood and be like, oh, you have one of those like just down the street. Or perhaps like you know, you just really want your neighborhood to look nice. You want to live in a place that's pretty. And so when somebody, you know, goes against that, and there's nothing you can do about it, you get upset. And I realized, you know, thinking about narcissism, like toxic people, typically what they do, well, first of all, they live essentially in a fantasy world. They have grandiose expectations. They mostly deal with what's called internal objects, which is essentially, just in layman's terms, it's essentially the person's idealized version of you. For example, like when they first meet you, they take a mental snapshot of you and then they keep it inside. And then from that point forward, they only ever deal with the internal object, the internal idealized version of you. So they look at you, they take a snapshot, and then they essentially Photoshop it. They turn you in their mind into how you're supposed to fit into their plan and how you're supposed to fit into their grand scheme of things. And they imagine like what you can do for them and what you're supposed to do for them. And so what they do with both people and circumstances is they have their ideal inside their mind. And then what they have to do is they have to have reality conform to what the ideal is, whether it's people or things. And so you can imagine that if that's how you live your life, you're going to be pretty upset because reality many times does not match your internal fantasy, idealization, expectations. So they're very angry people. And what happens is when you come across a situation that goes against your ideal, you have a couple different things that you can do. Now, if you approach it from the toxic point of view, the toxic approach, what you can do is you can try and force that thing to fit your idealization, right? Just outright force it, which is obviously wrong and bad. Well, it depends. Like obviously, so I have weeds start growing in the lawn, and by the way, that is one of the things that's been bothering me. So you just get a spray. You do force it, right? That would be an appropriate thing because it's not hurting anybody but the weeds, and that's acceptable. But when it comes to like a person, for example, you shouldn't force people. That's something that is it's mostly accepted throughout all of civilization, but definitely that's something that's taught in the gospel. You shouldn't force people. And yet there's people that do that. They force people in order to achieve their goals, in order for that person to fit into their grandiose idealization of how things are supposed to go. Now, if you can't change that person, okay, there's other things that you can do as a toxic person. Like if you can't like directly force them, you can resort to trickery and manipulation, right? Try and like through like covert means, try and get them to change their behavior. For example, you could start a campaign of like gossip about a person, hoping that if you get enough people in on it, they'll pressure the person to, conform to whatever it is that you want them to conform to. Or maybe to like protect yourself. If you feel like that person is a threat to you socially, then you just turn things around. You run a campaign to get people on your side, and you spread lies, or you do whatever you need to do in order to win people over to your side, right? So that's one approach that you can take as a toxic person. Now, if through direct force or the different tools of manipulation, if those things don't work, then what a toxic person does, and this is talked about all the time when you're learning about narcissism, is you resort to delusion. If you cannot make reality match your idealization, then what you have to do is you have to mentally make it so that this situation is okay. And you resort to delusion. You basically lie to yourself. You turn to justification. So for example, let me just think. So for example, say that you're in a situation like you're at work and nobody likes you. That's not the desirable outcome. So you try and like force it, you try and trick people, you do everything that you can, but you can't change that situation. And so at that point, what you do is you just lie to yourself. And you say, well, the reason why they don't like me is because I'm so amazing. They're jealous of me. They're jealous of my brain, my smarts, my knowledge. They're jealous of what a good worker I am, or what, how beautiful I am, whatever the case may be. And so you can imagine that people that are really toxic, really far down the spectrum, living so much in fantasy and idealization, there's so many times when reality does not match the idealization that there's probably a substantial amount of delusion uh, that's adopted by the narcissist, or um, the toxic person. So we obviously can't do that, and I just want to share something really quick, because there is a scriptural basis, I think, for this idea. Let me go to Moses chapter 4. All right. So this has to do with Satan, and he really is, in my mind, the quintessential epitome of what it is to be toxic. Okay. So it says here, this is in the pre-existence, and I, the Lord God, spake unto Moses, saying, that Satan whom thou hast commanded in the name of mine only begotten is the same which was from the beginning. And he came before me, saying, behold, here am I, send me, I will be thy son, and I will redeem all mankind. So this right here, this is pretty grandiose, meaning it's, let me look up how grandiose is defined. I'll add that to my, where is it? I'll add that to my spreadsheet of vocabulary. Grandiose. Characterized by affection of grandeur or splendor, by absurd exaggeration. Okay, that's perfect. I'll look up the other ones in the other dictionaries and then add that to my spreadsheet. Impressive because of uncommon largeness, scope, effect, or grandeur. So you get the idea. But I think this is kind of the key, or by absurd exaggeration. Okay, so Satan was being grandiose. I will redeem all of mankind, that not one soul shall be lost, and surely I will do it. That's just grand. The way that that's said, it's so prideful. And the idealization. Okay, the idealization is just like off the charts. It's grandiose. Wherefore give me thine honor. Oh, and there it is. And that's what toxic people want. They want worship. They want your attention. They want you to set them up on a pedestal. You're supposed to be below them. They're supposed to be higher than you. And essentially they want to be a god, and that's exactly what he's doing here. He wants to be even above God the Father in terms of honor. But behold, my beloved son, which was my beloved son, or my beloved and chosen from the beginning, said unto me. So here God is saying, I already had a plan. And I'm sure Satan already knew that. He probably already knew that Christ was the chosen one. And yet he wanted to go against God's plan. He had such nerve and pride that he was like, no, I let me do it. I'll do it better. Chosen from the beginning, and said unto me, Father, thy will be done. So in other words, your plan, your expectations, the way that you want things to go, your idealization, thy will be done, and the glory be thine forever. Wherefore, because that Satan rebelled against me and sought to destroy the agency of man, which I, the Lord God, had given him. Which makes sense, because like what we were just talking about, when you're toxic and you have an idealization, your primary means to try and achieve that idealization is through force or trickery. So basically you ignore other people's needs and wants, and you try and just override them like they're a dead object, like they don't even have life, like they're just a tool, right? So that I should give unto him mine own power, by the power of my only begotten, I cause that he should be cast down. So So what do we do? So we shouldn't be like Satan. We shouldn't be toxic and try and force our will, our vision, our idealization on the world. Uh, Essentially, what I think we should do is accept reality. We have to constantly be driving toward the principles of the gospel. And that's probably really the only thing that you should truly idealize. Idealize yourself, achieving exaltation and focusing on the here and now and the things that you need to focus on, the commandments, and but essentially have that be priority. Because that's like another thing that kind of is a big part of this conversation and this idea is where your priorities are at. Because if you're here in the world and you're worldly, then your idealization, your plan of how things should be, and your plan for yourself and your life is going to be worldly in nature. And your priorities are going to be worldly ones. And those are going to be the things that you try and defend, the things that you use force and trickery to obtain, if you're toxic, right? Whereas we've been told that our priorities should be for spiritual things. I don't have this scripture pulled up, but that we should be seeking for treasures in the kingdom of heaven, not on earth, and that's not to say that you can't, and we've talked about this many times. That doesn't mean don't go to college. It doesn't mean, don't try and earn a lot of money. Abraham was wealthy, and so were other prophets. They were wealthy. They had money, but they had their priorities straight. Their idealization, or I don't want to necessarily call it that, but their plan, their master plan, was focused on Christ in Heavenly Father and obtaining exaltation. So if you're dealing with anger, depression, because I think depression can result out of anger, like when you have all these things frustrating your plans, and that might be why I have depression. So hopefully kind of me readjusting myself now, maybe it'll help me. But, for example, I've come to realize, maybe I have too many expectations and idealizations of how things are supposed to go in life. For example, I've talked a number of times about the homestead and how there's just like never ending projects, never ending things to maintain and work on and stuff like that. And, whether it's weeds or whether it's a dirty, filthy garage or whether it's trying to figure out which chicken coop to put the chickens in, the leaking hydrant out there. It's like a water spout that I use to fill the stock tank. By the way, I think we fixed that, so that's not going to be frustrating me anymore. But all these like different things, it's just like never ending frustrations of my idealization of my homestead. I want my homestead to be just like perfectly clean and well kept and just like, and this is where pride comes in. I think that the motivating drive or factor in that is wanting to appear good to others, like for people to see the homestead and be like, oh, that's a cute homestead. Oh, it's so nice. And they really have their stuff together. And I think that's what a lot of us, it doesn't matter if you're poor or not, a lot of us want to be seen in a certain way by the world. There's the daily siren. I don't know if you can hear that or not. It's noon as I'm recording this. And so I realized maybe my idealizations are too high. They're too grandiose. They're not humble enough. Because in reality, it's hard. Not that you can't do it. You can. I can definitely take care of all this stuff, but it's hard to take care of an entire homestead, or like even in your house, it's hard to keep your house perfectly clean. And when we start using words like perfect, that goes along with idealization. If what you need or what you want as part of your plan is to always have a perfectly clean house, you can do it. Yes, you can do it. but there's probably also going to be a lot of frustration and therefore anger when things just keep happening, because we live in a world where there's entropy, right? Things in this world tend to go from an orderly state and then slowly turning into chaos. So you can get your house like all perfectly in order and everything's good, but just through through the process of time and through natural processes, your house is going to get dirty. Whether it's as a result of dust, that's like the thing that'll definitely set in, or whether it's just, you have people living in the house and people forget to put things away, or things get moved around. You might have like a table that you want perfectly lined up with the wall or something like that, and people accidentally push it, and so you have to like keep readjusting. You always have to keep on top of the dishes and the laundry and stuff like that, unless you want to live in filth and squalor, so. And there's any number of things, when it comes to my channel. I get frustrated a lot of times with certain comments, typically when they're like rude or they're just like outright contrarian. Like it feels like the person's just wanting to be contrarian to what I'm saying. But I realize that on my side, I have an ideal, for example, of the church. I want everybody to essentially not embrace false ideas, for example. Now that's kind of grandiose because that would suggest that I have the right ideals. And I do feel like my approach is correct, or the closest to the truth, on relying on the prophet, not just scriptures, not just the journal of discourses, but all of it together. But still, these are like my own conclusions that I'm coming to. And when you try to apply that to everybody, you're going to have problems, because that's not reality. Other people have their own methods at attempting to arrive to the truth. And so when I say something that fits in with my worldview, inevitably it's going to clash with other people that have a different worldview or idealization. I guess worldview would be another term that you could use, because it kind of goes with like just the way that you experience life and the way that you think things are and the way that you think things operate, or the way that you want things to go. So maybe worldview is the best term to use. So inevitably, if I'm here on YouTube and I'm saying stuff that goes against your worldview, then it's going to be a frustration. It doesn't matter if you like don't believe what I say. Your ideal would be that everyone thinks the way that you do, and my ideal would be that everyone thinks the way that I do. And so that's where you have to like reduce your, I guess, like lessen your expectations, or another way you could say that is kind of pull back from your ideal and accept reality. And when you do that, then you don't have such a strong drive to achieve your ideal. So like when someone comes on here and they say something, because sometimes people come on here and I know for a fact that they're wrong about something, so I'll pile on all these different quotes to show them that they're wrong, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing if I do it the right way. Maybe not pile on so many quotes, or just like try and do it with love. Because at the same time, you can't just like sit back, and you could go like the exact opposite direction. Instead of trying to achieve your ideal and going full force, trying to achieve your ideal, you could go the exact opposite direction, but go too far, where you don't care about anything. You just let everything happen. You're not really acting. You just, whatever. And you can't do that. Because, that's probably the equivalent of being lazy or just being apathetic about life in the world. So you have to find the middle where your idealizations aren't so great that you're starting to like try and force other people. You're trying to trick or manipulate other people to have them fit your idealization. But you also can't go all the way back and become apathetic toward life and just nothing matters to you at all, and you essentially just don't act and you just go with the flow. You have to stay in this like mid-range where you do try and achieve your goals and you have proper idealizations. So for example, it is proper to try and maintain the homestead and my house and other things in life. Try and correct people if they really don't know, but have it within realistic expectations, and not try and like be a Superman and just like, perfection, you know, just always be, for example, always working on the house, make the bed, do my best to um, pick up garbage, put dirty laundry away, stuff like that. But when it falls short and it doesn't reach perfection, just be okay with that. Be more humble and not be so prideful, so as to like, oh, I always have to have my house perfect. You don't. You don't. And if you feel like you do, then you should examine the reasons why you feel like your house has to be perfect. You know, um, Now there could be like some mental health things with that. Like for example, if you have OCD, that's something different, and you should like try and seek treatment for that through a psychologist. But putting stuff like that aside, I think that typically when we have to have things perfect, it's because there's much deeper issues inside of us. For example, you need other people to see your perfection. And that's the only way that you can feel good about yourself, is when other people, external forces, when they validate you, praise you, worship you, whatever. Um, so you shouldn't do that. You need to learn to um, provide your own feelings of self-worth and be okay with being humble. And I think that the term poor in spirit kind of comes to mind. Poor in spirit, I've heard it defined as like being humble. But if you think about it this way, if you think about your idealizations and how you want your world to be, and your plan for your own life and your world, if it's grandiose, I don't think that that's poor in spirit. It's like rich in spirit. Like you have incredible plans and you want to show the world just how amazing you are. But if you're poor in spirit, uh, you've scaled that back, ideally to within realistic limits. And you're poor and you're okay. You're okay with not being perfect. You're okay with not being the best. You're okay with not always winning at everything. You're okay with other people when they depart from the course that you would choose for them. For example, my brother who's decided to do the transgender thing, he is a biological male. I'm not going to join the delusion. um, I could either get like really, really upset about it because he's departing from what I would have for him, because I would want him to be like me, to be living the gospel and doing the best that he could and going to the temple and, whatever. I could either get really upset about that because I'm trying to force that in some way in my mind. And I could even try and force him to comply, or use, like I said, the trickery, the covert means to try and get him to come over this direction. But that wouldn't be good, right? I also can't go the apathetic route and just do nothing. So I'm going to continue to be a good example. I'm not going to become an advocate for that cause. Because if you're just apathetic in not acting, that wouldn't do any good either. We should still be an example, but you can't go past the point where you're like forcing that person, or you're shaming them, or you're treating them poorly in order to, because like you could do like the silent treatment, like, oh, you're going to do that, well, I'm just not going to talk to you as a punishment, or whatever. So it's like you have to find the limits of what is appropriate and what is realistic at the same time. And I think there's a lot of people in misery right now, just regular people, good people. They don't realize that their idealizations are too high, because they may have been taught by their parents, like, yes, you need to. And this kind of goes into um, the conversation that we've had before about what a phenomenon in the church, especially in Utah and out west and stuff like that, where there's a big emphasis on going to college and then buying a home, so that you can have a nice home for your family and raise your family. That's a good thing. The reality of it is that it's really hard to do. In the way that society has changed is that basically both people have to work in order to own a home, or at least own a what you would normally classify as a decent home. But if you lower your idealization and you adhere to reality, you know, you'll probably be better off if you accept something that's less than the ideal. And you won't be struggling with the frustrations of not being able to get into a ridiculously expensive house. You know, um, socially, when you look at your friends, like, do you feel like you have to compete and you have to like be performing at a certain level in order to be accepted by those friends? That's probably something that if that's the case, it probably frustrates you because your ideal is too high. And to achieve that ideal, you have to do certain things that are easily frustrated. And so you get upset, you get angry, you get jealous. That's another thing that comes out of it. You get jealous and envious of other people because you're supposed to be the one that's on top. You're the one whose idealization is supposed to come to fruition. And so when you see other people succeeding at what you're trying to do, then you become envious and you become jealous. I think it all has to do with where you have your heart and your mind and what you treasure, or in other words, what your idealization is for yourself. And the more grandiose that it is, uh, essentially, the more prideful you probably are. And that's not to say don't shoot for great things, you know, but it has to be like temperate and measured. And what I've noticed when it comes to like success, like, there's certain things that I want to achieve, but I need to be realistic, but also just kind of slowly move in that direction, because a lot of times the things that are great in life, the things that are of worth, they usually take time and effort and hard work. You know, there's a lot of people, for example, that um, this is like a very common phenomenon. You start like a YouTube channel, for example, and you have to just keep going. You have to keep going, and just keep putting more and more effort into it and stay consistent. And usually it takes a while before you start seeing results, before people start really, subscribing to your channel. So some people get um, discouraged by that and quit early because their expectations, their idealization doesn't get met quick enough. But what I've noticed in life, whether it's YouTube, whether it's graphic design, whether it's work that I've done in the army, or just other things, every single time it's just been because of just like determination, just like measured, frequent effort and work. Work, you know, and being patient. Um, I don't know. I can't remember why I started talking about this, but yeah, it's okay. It's okay to have goals, but I think that's different from like expectations, like I'm supposed to have this, or I'm entitled to have this, or this is really who I am. Whereas if you have a goal, you realize that you could fail and that you'd be okay with that, but you're still going to like move in that direction. And then if it fails, then the world's not over. You know, maybe you just move on to something else and put your efforts elsewhere. So anyway, to wrap this up, uh, ever since I kind of like realized that I need to adjust my uh, idealizations, whether it be for commenters on YouTube or whether it be for the house or the homestead or things that keep breaking down, simply by reducing the idealization has given me a lot of stress and made me a lot less angry. And Jenica and I have basically stopped arguing, you know, because I just been so stressed by things because of so many individual instances of frustration that it just like put me on edge with everything. You know, it's just like it just felt like attack, 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 attack. But now that I've like, okay, I don't need things to be up here. I'm okay with like this. You know, when things happen, it's not, there's now nothing there to attack because that's not where my focus is. It's down here. So when something breaks, it's just like, okay, I mean, that's fine. We'll just deal with the inconvenience for right now. It's not ideal, but I accept that. And I'll just, you know, be patient and try and fix that thing. Or if it's something that's not fixable, then find some other solution, some other way, you know. Um, and it's brought me just a lot of internal peace since I've done this. I feel really good. And I think it's going to help me on the channel. I think it's going to help me in life. And I think at times in life you kind of realize these things, but sometimes you don't really understand it until you put all these pieces together. Sorry. And essentially that's what the gospel is trying to teach us, is to be poor in spirit, to be humble, to um, have our treasure be spiritual treasure, in the treasure that you'll receive after this world. You know, if you achieve exaltation, and having your priorities be God and others, you know, um, instead of like trying to compete with somebody because you have to prove to them that you're better than them. You know, that's not really putting someone above yourself or before yourself. And it's okay if you do end up being more than that person, but if that's your frame of mind, I don't think that's the right frame of mind when you're in like competition mode, because it's just your idealizations are grand usually if that's the case. And I think that's ultimately the main story, the main lesson behind Satan and what we learn about him in the pre-existence, is that he had a very grandiose plan and idealization, and he was using to use all force in order to achieve that idealization. And then he even wanted to be above God himself. So that's like probably the worst that it can get. There's probably a lot more I could say about this, but I think that kind of wraps it up. So if you're struggling with like a lot of like anger, sadness, you know, life is just kind of like depressing right now, then you might want to do that. You might want to examine what your goals are in life and what you're trying to achieve and what your ideal is, and then lessening those things, not making it so important to keep up with the Joneses, to keep a perfect house, to whatever's going on at work, you know, to be ideal at whatever you're trying to do at work. Maybe just scale it back. Don't go so far that you become apathetic and you just don't care. Just keep things within reasonable limits and be humble. Be okay with not being the best. Be okay with just being an ordinary person. Um, and just focus on the things that actually matter. And I think you'll be set for a much happier life. And in the results, I can tell you, the results are immediate. If you don't want to wait, it seems to me, as I've implemented this, that the results are immediate as soon as you as soon as you adjust those expectations and idealizations. So, all right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.